My name is Chris Detzel, and I'm the Director of Customer Community and Engagement here at Reltio. And we have a couple of special guests today, Sara Lyons. Sara, it's funny because this is the first time you've been on, so we're excited to have you on today.
Oh.
The topic of today is the Reltio Way Delivery Methodology Implementation. We also have Chris Ilof. He's the Director of Strategic Services here at Reltio. The rules of the show are normal, but if you're new, please keep yourself on mute. All questions should be asked in the chat, or you can take yourself off mute and ask. It's okay too. The call is being recorded, and we will post this onto the community. And lastly, please take the survey at the end of the call. A Zoom pop-up comes up, and it's just 3 questions that it asks. We're always wanting to get better, and so feedback, in my opinion, is a huge gift, and so we take your feedback seriously. So we do have some upcoming shows that I'm really excited about. Today's show is on the Reltio Way Delivery Methodology Implementation, so that should be really cool. I'm looking forward to this myself. Next week we do have a show with Dimitri on how do I search my data with Reltio APIs. Be a little bit more technical. We have, if you were on the release webinar yesterday, we announced the Snowflake connector and Reltio Google BigQuery connector. We've made some updates on those things, and so we'll go on to a deep dive within those 2 shows with Reltio Snowflake connector and the Reltio Google BigQuery connector. We do have some other shows coming up. I'm just still trying to book those, but that's what we have for today. And I'm going to stop sharing, Sara, and let you go ahead and share.
All right. So hopefully everyone can see my screen here. Is it good? Okay. So yeah, thank you, Chris, very much. Yes, it is my first time on community webinar, so I'm excited also. And definitely lots of other exciting stuff coming up after this one. So thank you all for joining. I hope everyone is doing well, and we're just talking about the weather. Hope not everyone is freezing. We wanted to give a little bit of background just before we dive in here. And the topic of this webinar, it came about because of feedback here on community. We'd seen questions about, how do you implement Reltio and what are these best practices about? So we wanted to share this with you and, be transparent and open about how we approach this. Now, at the same time, our professional services team, we've been working to document this methodology we follow while we're implementing so that it is available to you. So the timing of this is perfect. And now we're at a point where we're almost done with that task. So we do want to start sharing this with everyone now. So what we have planned to cover today is the objective and the value of this methodology. We'll talk through our approach, and we won't cover all of the assets and templates that we've created, but we'll touch on a few of the key ones. And then we'll talk about some resources that are available to you and what's coming to look out for in the future. So those of you that were lucky enough to also join yesterday's webinar, you heard that one of the new things Reltio is rolling out is our velocity packs. And as it was shared yesterday, these are pre-built and standardized and industry-specific solutions, and they're ready to deploy and use from day one. And the goal of these is really to simplify implementations and make time to value faster. And this is not a session on velocity packs by any means. There'll be more to come on that, but I call that out because the methodology that our team has created also takes advantage of those. So now you'll have the standardized pre-built configuration of the solution, and then the standardized templates and processes of the methodology here. And those 2 things together can really simplify these implementations and reduce that time to value that our customers are looking for. There we go. So getting into this methodology, or the Reltio Way, as we call it, It accelerates time to value, and it delivers that value in an agile and iterative approach. It's prescriptive. It covers the best practices of how to deploy the Reltio solution, and it delivers these iterative value milestones throughout the entire timeline and your MDM journey so that you can realize that value early and often. I will call out, for the sake of this session, we're going to talk a lot about Reltio MVP plan and that implementation. Obviously, your journey continues on much longer after that MVP, but those are the examples we're going to talk about today. So on this slide, this is a very high level view of the MVP project implementation plan. And this is a template that we now use for all of our MVP implementations. So you can see this is laid out to be a 12-week plan. And this is actually targeting deployment at week 10, and then weeks 11 and 12, the last sprint, is a support or stabilization period. So to deliver that iterative value throughout this plan, we identified some standardized milestones to track, and then you can report on incremental value realized as those are achieved. So the first one, on every engagement, the plan will call for loading of data immediately, as soon as possible. Now, we all understand that that configuration and your data model can change and be adjusted through the sprint cycles throughout the plan, but the sooner we can get this loaded and viewable in the Reltio data quality dashboard, the sooner you are have the ability to view any data quality issues you might not have known about before until you're able to load this and bring it together in Reltio. So that allows you to start acting on those data quality issues in the source now in week 2 of your implementation, instead of having to wait until the very end to start doing anything about that. Number 2, the second milestone, following this plan, the condition is targeted to be completed in week 6 in the test environment. So this allows visibility of the consolidated profiles of the business entities and their relationships in your data. Now, different customers have different levels of maturity with MDM, and some organizations have never been able to see this information before. So that's a big win for them to be able to view that on week 6. And the other thing that it can allow is you can start to see the volume of your data remediation efforts and start planning and scoping for that, again, now versus the very end of the project, where you might be scrambling and maybe have some surprises that you're having to plan for that you weren't expecting. The last milestone of this plan is actually having those profiles and relationships available in the prod environment and available for consumption by a downstream application. And there's actually a work stream within the MVP plan that does allow for integration with at least one downstream system. So if you can adhere to that MVP scope, you can have the integration enabled at this point at week 10 in production. And this is where the value just really starts to open up by actually activating that data to support multiple business initiatives here. Things like omni-channel engagement, self-service, we have auditing and compliance reporting here, but there's a long list of other things where you're really starting to realize the value at this point. All right, so how does the methodology actually support you to deliver those milestones and values? It's a combination of checkpoints and standardization. This has been created to support agile implementations, and it also follows a structured framework of checkpoints to ensure that the team implementing can successfully deliver those milestones on the previous slide. And it also ensures that through every sprint in your implementation, you're focusing on the key activities to stay on track for your go live. And more importantly, making sure you're not ignoring any potential risks that could come as a surprise and delay the go live as you work up to that point. Each checkpoint correlates with one of the circles here, and we'll dive into those in detail here on the next few slides. But before we go on to that, as promised, there's a few key templates that we want to call attention to. So I mentioned on the previous slide, we have this MVP project plan. It's now standardized. We use it for all MVP implementations. To go along with that, we've also got a template of MVP user stories. So each core configuration area, or we call them modules. So a module is, think of a module for configuring and tuning match rules, or a module for enabling SSO. Each one of those has its own set of standardized user stories and templates to accelerate the planning for that module and the design and configuration.
Yes. Hey, Sarah, quick question for you. And it's like I'll get to it before I could, but will everybody have access to these afterwards? Can you give them to me and then I can put them out on the community?
Yeah, so not immediately available today, but very, very soon. We're finalizing that repository so that all customers and partners will have access to it. So we'll make an announcement on community when it is ready, but very, very soon, for sure.
Thank you.
Yep. We also have a template, the next one, to capture all of the feedback and recommendations from the Reltio team during your implementation. We've heard from customers that it can be very difficult to track all these recommendations if they're in different emails or if they're talked about in different meetings. Different people are in different meetings. So we've consolidated everything into one feedback document. For any of you that have been through a Reltio health check, it's very similar to the health check document. So it's just feedback on every component of your implementation. And now you've got this for reference, physical copy after professional services rolls off. And that's proven to be really valuable. Two more new assets that we have, both a requirements document and a test case document, which, Chris, you're going to talk about these a little bit. I think most of you have probably heard Chris before, and he's been on the customer side of things. So he can talk through how helpful these have been.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we realize is that, unless you've done an MDM implementation before, there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to not know, right? And that luck of just having that unique experience of building an MDM practice makes some of the requirements gathering a little tough, right? And with that, obviously, the functional testing that happens after to make sure that we've developed what is required in those requirements. So we decided to create kind of a standard or a baseline. Neither of these requirements or the functional test cases are meant to be, custom and specific to your implementation, but it from like an 80-20 rule type perspective, it's meant to cover, about 80% of what you can expect from functional requirements of the system, right, of the Reltio platform when it's installed. So you don't have to struggle with, not knowing what you don't know, and use those as a baseline, if you will, and then build upon those, right? So it's intended to be a bit of a jump start, like it says, really to get you that 80%. So then we can work through the 20% that's really more about your custom implementation and the goals that you have and objectives that you have for your implementation. We have a focus on, again, just basic kind of functional requirements, what you expect of the system to produce from an outcome perspective. But we also have some questionnaires to help drive the conversation around non-functional requirements, as these are the ones that we've noticed in our experience that don't get talked about probably enough way up front. We run into them when we're doing development or design, or sometimes even when we're doing testing, things that really speak to security concerns or constraints around the system from a performance and access perspective, right? Or even an availability perspective. So key things there, that's more of a questionnaire rather than some custom some basic requirements, because non-functionals tend to be really, really specific to your business and your business needs, right? So we'll be having those conversations early on. Sara will talk about that in the next phases when she dives through those, right, in the readiness pieces. And again, the functional test cases should really support and jumpstart testing as well, right? Especially the integrated testing that you're going to be doing in user acceptance testing. And it's got more of that focus on what you expect the system to do, the Reltio implementation and platform to do from an outcome perspective. So not necessarily like the unit test cases, but definitely more of an integrated system test cases.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, we're very excited to have those created. That has been a long time coming. So we'll be very happy to start leveraging those. The last one on this list is an important one. And this is a go live readiness assessment. And this is a checklist that we go through. The unique thing about this is it's called a go live readiness assessment, but it actually starts tracking your readiness from the first sprint of a project. We don't wait until the week before deployment to determine if you're ready for that. So I saved this one for last because it's a good segue to go back to those checkpoints and what key activities that we're tracking to make sure that you hit that go live date and are able to start unlocking the value as fast as possible. For each checkpoint, there's an assessment of those key activities that should have been completed. And more importantly, a risk associated if any of those activities are skipped or not accounted for. So as we walk through these, we'll also make mention of some other templates that are now available. So you'll have an idea of that as well. So the visualized checkpoint, this is all about making sure that the project is initiated and kicked off and that the team is setting themselves up for success. So things you're looking at and assessing to make sure they were completed appropriately are even an introduction and a kickoff meeting. And I know this sounds like a no-brainer, but it does get skipped a lot of the time. And this is really a key step to make sure that all of the stakeholders involved have the same expected outcome of the implementation. The last thing you want to do is get to week 10 and realize that not everyone had the same goal in mind for this implementation. So, I mean, this readiness goes all the way back to week 1, day 1 of your implementation. You're also looking at things like making sure you are reviewing the project plan and user story templates and ensuring that anything specific to your implementation is updated in there. And doing reviews and sign-offs, again, just making sure everyone is aligned. There's so much importance on alignment here. And again, it sounds like a no-brainer, but that's where things can start to go awry, is when people start making assumptions and there's not necessarily transparency across all the stakeholders. Not intentionally, but people get busy and it happens. So one of the goals of this checklist is to make sure there is a location that everyone can go and see the status and risk of everything. You're looking at things like those requirements that Chris talked about, making sure those are reviewed, baselined, and signed off on, doing a fit gap analysis of anything that is applicable to your requirements, starting that feedback document that we talked about on the previous slide. And then again, just making sure that the results of this checkpoint are reviewed and aligned across the team, so that everyone has the same expectation and understanding going into the next few sprints and preparing for the next checkpoint, which is model. And when we say model, this is really focused on design. So we're looking at completion of that first data load that we talked about, and then finalization of the data model and overall Reltio design. So key activities we need to make sure are completed here are very important. One, completion of the Reltio Academy training by the customer. And we do want to stress it's important to get this done earlier on so that as we are going through knowledge transfer through the project, you have that base understanding of Reltio, and then the hands-on experience you can get during the implementation really solidifies that understanding. Again, setting you up for success when professional services rolls off. Completion.
One is from an academy standpoint. I know this is focused a little bit on our implementation, but our partners are highly engaged in our academy and getting certified just consistently and constantly. So, I think she's talking about our customers here, obviously trying to get certified and things like that as well, and learning from the academy. So just make sure you're taking a look at that. And then a question, how do you know the data model designed by the implementation consultants are good?
So again, it's a good question. We will start with that out of the box pre-built configuration that, we've gotten feedback from specific industries to have the data model tailored for that industry. And then it's a matter of, actually, we'll talk about this in the next slide too, but ensuring that the end-of-sprint demos are happening throughout design and configuration. And that really helps in getting feedback early and often. It's also why it's important to have the data loaded as soon as you can, so that the end users and stakeholders of this implementation can see it. Like I said, in week 3, week 4, you're not waiting until the end of the engagement to make sure that it's right. We can demo different scenarios, go through the requirements and making sure that we're accounting for each scenario in the requirements. Does that help?
Please feel free to ask.
Yeah, I actually do have a question, because, I think for experienced clients, maybe we kind of know what's good, what's not. But for a new, for new tenant or new business, I think it's hard to know whether it's good or not. And we have cases where, and we experience some performance issue, but then so we were told that this data model is not necessarily good, only after it's in production. But we didn't know at the time, right? So only when it went live, and then it's hard to change.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. We know scenarios like that have happened. Just to be completely honest and transparent, that is a big part of the reason why we wanted to formalize this methodology and continue to improve on it to avoid things like that happening. So as we've matured, we've been able to take learnings like that and adjust this methodology so that we can avoid things like that at all, as much as we can. Talking about a newer customer who's not as mature. The other thing is, this methodology, as it has become more robust and built out, it does account for making sure we proactively explain some of the decisions we make and what the impacts are, so that, again, everyone has that transparency and understanding more.
I think that it might be good to have some guideline what not to do, maybe. Like, for example, if data, one profile has 200, 300 crosswalks, is a good design? Is it something need to be done before even loading into Reltio? Like, I don't know what's not to do, right? Maybe what we often heard is what to do, maybe what not to do. It's probably.
Yeah. And Vivian, I know you've been around for a long time. So, I mean, you've been in the trenches with us for a while. So to that point, we know that has been an area of improvement that we should focus on. So we are accounting for that in this updated methodology. There, as part of the both model and construct checkpoints, we have an implementation checklist that talks about those exact types of things you're calling out. Things like, is the number of crosswalks below 200? If it's not, we can look and assess in that readiness assessment checklist, why, what's the risk? Do we need to make an exception, or do we need to address that now in the model phase before, like you said, when we get to production and you start to have performance issues? Yep. So there is a checklist like that now. And then the feedback document also plays into that. So it calls out those recommendations. And when I said the why, that includes why you should not do something and what is the negative impact you will see if you decide to do this anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, excellent question. Like I said, I know you've got a lot of experience in this, so definitely like to hear your feedback on it for sure. Some of the other things here in the model checkpoint as well, I just want to call out, this is where we also hold our Reltio architecture review board, which we now do for every project. It's just a required part of every project now. And actually, one of the things we review is that implementation checklist, where if we're deviating from any of the best practices, we talk about why and get input on how we can change that to make sure that we're avoiding some of those negative experiences you brought up. And then again, making sure that everyone on the team is aligned with the assessment at this checkpoint and any risks associated with it, so there's no surprises going into the next checkpoint. So how model is focused on design, construct is really focused on configuration and verification before moving into user acceptance testing. So things like completion of the majority of the user stories. Again, we're assuming we're operating in an agile methodology mode. So, there's going to be tweaking and adjusting of the configuration through sprint cycles, but you do want to make sure that the majority of this is finished before you're going into UAT. So you're not completely redoing configuration when you get into that testing cycle. And we mentioned a key success factor in this phase also is making sure you have those into sprint demos. So you're getting that feedback early and often. This is where the bulk of enablement and testing activities are also completed. So we do have now a standard end user UI enablement. These are agendas that, slightly different from Reltio Academy. You actually get into your UI and are looking at your data. And there's a set of standardized agendas to make those sessions easier to plan. This is where we're really focusing on making sure that testing, test plans are completed, reviewed, executed, and getting the sign off of system integration testing before we start really getting into the big moments of actually going into the deployment. And this last checkpoint commission, this is the final assessment we do before we move into the support phase of this implementation. Again, execution and sign off of user acceptance testing. We really have a focus on getting sign-offs here also, because that's another piece where I think there's always been room for improvement, and just making sure that the entire team is aligned on, yes, everyone did agree that this meets our requirements and we're good to go into production. There's no ambiguity on that. Execution of all the steps of the deployment plan, just making sure everything has been successfully migrated to production. And an important one, wrapping up final knowledge transfer. We do plan for knowledge transfer through the entire engagement, but I think just the nature of real life is some of this does get pushed to the end. So we'll do a final knowledge transfer and sign off of this as well. And then again, the final review, did any of these steps for deployment get missed? Is there an exception where that's acceptable to move on? and what that risk is and what the next steps are to address it. So again, that's done for every checkpoint here. And then lastly, this support or stabilization period. And this is really just a hypercare support. It's typically a 2-week period. If there is any, remaining knowledge transfer, we can do this now. Again, any issues that come up that need immediately addressing, you've got not just a customer support team, but your professional services team still available to address it ASAP. We have also worked to formalize a final transition from the professional services team to your customer success and engineering teams. We've made this more robust than it has been in the past. Again, making sure there's that alignment between not just the internal teams at Reltio, but also with your customer team and your partner, if one of those is involved, to make this transition seamless and have it continue to be a good experience for you as professional services starts to ramp down. And then we'll also have a conversation, what is next for you on your journey? Do you need any additional support from professional services to continue that data activation and expanding the value? So we can finalize that then, it might be the end of one phase, but maybe now you have another objective you're working towards that professional services can continue to help or set you up for success if you're going to continue that on your own. All right, so that is
So
really
I have a quick question. So just a quick question: is there a data model changes in the construction phase on how we do that?
Honestly, I would be surprised if there weren't some data model changes. Again, we want to start with that out of the box solution and have most of the design worked out before you go into construct. But we always know, like, as you start to dig deeper into requirements and get into more details, you might need to make some adjustments. The other side of that is, yes, there is this out of the box solution that we want to leverage as much as possible. I think there's always going to be like a organization specific attribute we might need to add. But the idea is we're not starting from scratch and we're not customizing beyond this out of the box solution.
Okay. And I do have another question, and probably should have addressed this before, but so this is about professional services paid offered by Reltio going forward, or is this kind of, hey, when a customer buys us, then they do professional services and things like that? How does that kind of relate to this question? Does that make sense?
So I'll see if I can answer that, if I'm understanding that.
Here, I'll just put it in the chat.
Okay.
It's probably a little bit better. I was trying to say it better, but I couldn't.
Hey Chris, maybe you're kind of poking at the different delivery models that Reltio PS has, like value assurance versus, frankly, Sarah, I can't remember the name of the other one.
The blended model where Reltio is responsible.
Yeah, maybe that's what you're poking at, Chris.
Yeah, good question. So this methodology, it applies regardless of the delivery model.
Okay.
I'll put it this way. You don't pay extra for us to follow this methodology. This is just the way Reltio implements it. Like you mentioned, our partners are always being enabled and certified. Same applies for this methodology. So the goal is we'll get this methodology regardless of the delivery model or if it's Reltio or a partner implementing it.
Yeah, and just to go back, it is paid. I mean, it's something we have to, that people pay for consulting and professional services.
Correct. If you have professional services engaged, you don't have to pay an extra fee to follow this methodology.
Got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. So again, resources going forward, we will continue, as I just said, we'll continue to have enablement sessions, and webinars about this. Again, we have followed this methodology for a while. We needed to document it and fine tune it so that we can share it with everyone, so that everyone can leverage it. So as we continue to go through that, we'll continue to enable everyone. If there is a specific topic you want to cover, call it out on community. We watch that closely. We're always interacting there, and we can get that scheduled if there's a request for it. As I mentioned, oh, sorry, go ahead.
This is Chandra here. So this also, sorry, I joined a bit late in the middle of the session, but so is this also meaning that it's not about you, not just about you, sharing the Reltio implementation methodology or delivery methodology? So that's one thing that you want to, propagate. I see that. That the second part is, right, you already have professional services team, so anybody can, get paid services, additional services from your team, right? But one other thing I'm thinking that's what I think you are proposing here. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is so are you also going forward take full implementation support, like like an SI solution implementation partner, like any other consulting company? Are you also planning to provide?
I apologize. I'm not sure I understand the question.
Am I breaking up?
No, I can hear you. I just didn't understand the last part.
Are you saying that Reltio is also providing the consulting services, like full implementation of Reltio for any customer?
So we have always offered the offering of implementing the Reltio piece of configuration. That's not changing.
Okay. So that only the Reltio piece of the configuration.
Correct. Are you asking, like, is Reltio going to start doing full, like, integration and data governance? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, for all concerning, like in a concerning.
No, that's not the plan. We're going to stay focused on just the Reltio configuration, but this methodology just supports us to do that better for our customers and partners. Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay. So, and within the out of the box features, if it is any additional customization required, you are not planning to support. Are you planning to?
I think it's consider the boundary. Anything that is code based that Reltio would manage and configure, right?
Right.
So anything from constructing that and configuring that, Reltio professional services, that's within Reltio professional services scopes, whether it's the full implementation or maybe some onward future work for very targeted small efforts, right? But only within the boundaries of the Reltio platform and that kind of configured code base. We wouldn't be stepping out beyond that to develop, say, MuleSoft ETL, right, to deliver data to some repository or application downstream, right? So those kind of developments where you're plugging the data either to get in and out of Reltio, you think of it from that perspective in general, from a scope, SIs or customers, IT teams themselves are the ones that are managing those integration points.
Got it.
And in a lot of cases, we have many cases where SIs are doing the Reltio, implementation, right? And they're doing the configuration. So those options are also available. It's kind of like Reltio and or partners in that case, SI partners. And what we do there is more of what Kurt Perlman had just mentioned a moment ago, which is the value assurance piece, which are checkpoints where we work with SIs, right, who are doing the implementation, just to assure quality and success of the project. Implement our expertise in there and provide that to our SIs, basically.
Okay. Thank you, Chris and Sara.
Absolutely.
Sara, probably good to mention, this is Matt, probably good to mention with the resources that Reltio Academy is integrating the implementation or delivery methodology into our courseware, and you'll see existing courseware and upcoming courseware very much referencing this methodology. Probably just good to call it out.
No, that's an excellent call out, Matt. It's another thing to look for coming soon. And actually that along with, like I said, the actual repository, like I said, we're finalizing making that available to everyone. So again, we'll make an announcement when that is available. And then lastly, if you have an active engagement right now, one of your best resources is the professional services team. If you have questions about this methodology or want to see, hey, you know, what's the goal of running this assessment? Like if you haven't seen that yet, you know, leverage your team for those types of questions also. So that was all the information I have. If there's more questions, I know we have a few minutes, we can talk through those. Questions, comments, or feedback, we're happy to hear it.
There's no other questions in the chat. So I'll give it like 30 more seconds, but so Sara, Chris, thank you so much for putting this on. I think a lot of folks were really asking for this. And so certainly the repository and things like that, when that's finished, we'll post that here on the community. Sara, yeah, go ahead, Sara. You have a comment? You want to just add it? You know, just take yourself off mute?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for giving this presentation. It's really cool to see the new resources that are being offered. I think they'll be super valuable. I was just sort of thinking, going back to what Vivian was saying about how sometimes newer teams don't know things. I think for that model stage for our team, it was our first MDM, and our architects hadn't worked with MDM a lot. So like that model stage took a lot longer. And I almost feel like you need two different plans for like teams that have had an MDM before versus teams who are new, because something we'd experience a lot would be the architect from the consulting team we were working with saying like, oh, so like, what do you guys want to do? And our head architect was saying, well, we were hoping we could get recommendations from you on what the best thing is to do. So like, there was a lot more back and forth, and I felt like we couldn't utilize that early milestone early just because we had to reload the data. And a lot of that was just like due to, I think, learning on our architecture team's part. So I think like it might make sense to have different models for different teams based on their experience. And maybe something that could be added to this repository would be like a pre-architecture section just for architects so they could get more familiar, and like maybe that would help speed up this process so that like your teams aren't being slowed down by like having to explain all these new concepts that may be more basic to you and your architects.
Love that.
Yeah, I made a note of that. And Sara, I know we talk a lot, so any other feedback you've got, yeah, we can definitely talk to that. Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, something for Matt to think about. Anyways, go ahead. Sorry.
So one quick question: if the data model changes in the construct phase, right? Then what do you suggest? Do you suggest reloading the data or using the new mapping, or how do we? What are the best practices there? Because often we can see that there's some, gaps in terms of getting this data model right the first time, because we would not know. So,
yeah, I mean, if it does change to the construct phase, yeah, it would require a reload most likely, and we'll account for that in the plan also. Like I said, we didn't go through the detailed like 100-line plan, but that is accounted for. That's why the construct phase is, I think, 2 to 3 sprints. It's not just one sprint. Like I said, we know that there's going to be adjustments to that out of the box model. So that is accounted for sure.
And this MVP, how many sources are you planning to ingest with respect to mastering, right? It's like, because it's a very short cycle, lovely representation in terms of how you are constructing in different phases.
Right.
Well, that I could see that number of sources kind of a thing. So.
Yep. Excellent question. Yeah, we do need to keep that in mind as we're scoping out your requirements, like before we even get to the actual engagement, and determining if your scope will be supported by the MVP plan, if that makes sense. So, MVP, you're really talking like maybe 2 to 3, maybe 4 sources, depending on the volume. But we'll also talk through, the recommendation from us is always start small so that you can execute and be successful. Don't try to boil the ocean and add 30 sources all in one phase and do like the big bang approach. If you can break it up into smaller, more contained implementation cycles, that will just help you be more successful. So did that answer the question?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah.
Great. Any other questions from anyone?
So basically, this is like more of a consolidation hub architecture style, right? So get the load, and then this is not something that we're doing, a different architectural style like transactional or whatever. There is more MVP is more preferred to be a consolidated style, like you get a record from the source and you match it, merge it.
Yeah. So I'll explain it this way. So the methodology is the same. Like we take the same approach no matter what implementation style you're implementing. The exact tasks in the project plan may change, and maybe some of the durations, or maybe there's an extra sprint or something like that. But the actual methodology is standard across the implementation styles. Like we're still going to have the same kind of checkpoints and fill out the same kind of documentation and do the same risk assessment regardless of that. Does that make sense?
The sources are giving, that's nice. But the point is that the sources are giving full loads and other stuff. Reltio out of the box has some delta detection kind of a thing. The incremental changes only flows in.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a thing which has to keep it outside the MVP.
Right. And no, it's excellent things you're calling out. That's getting into more like implementation specific details. And again, like we'll work through that in the project plan and adjust the plan as needed for that.
No, perfect.
Absolutely. We'll take that into account.
Take the survey at the end. Sara, Chris, thank you so much for coming and doing this. Really appreciate it. Hope to have you on some other shows. And then, the last thing is once I get the information, the repository information and the links and things like that, I'll share it to the community and you'll have it for your use. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, Sara.
Yeah. Thank you all. Bye.
All right. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Sara. This was really good.
Good.
Take care.
We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.